Good morning. Did everybody get enough to eat? It's too late now, you're here. So, would you stand with me, please? And let's turn to hymn number 147. We'll sing that this morning. Sing all four verses. Standing on the promises of Christ my King, through eternal ages let His praises ring. Lord, in the heights I will shout and sing, standing on the promises of God. Standing, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises that cannot fail. When the highway storms of mountain fear assail, by the living work of God I shall prevail. Standing on the promises of God. Standing, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of Christ the Lord. Mountain in eternally my strong core. Overcoming pain with the Spirit's sword. Standing on the promises of God. Standing, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises I cannot fall, resting every moment into the Spirit's call, resting in my Savior as my all in all. Standing on the promises of God. Standing, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. I'm standing on the promises of God. Great singing, thank you. Let's read scripture. We have one here. We're starting today the book of James. Great book. Today is rather short, but over the next few weeks we're going to be kind of lengthening these, so exercise your reading muscles. I once read a book where the fellow said one of the things they did one day as they gathered as believers was read the book of James kind of aloud. And I don't know if they went around, I don't know how they did it, but the end of it was weeping, repentance, and brokenness. So just a little thought, not saying we're going to get into that today, but as we read through it, you might want to think about that. I'll get us started. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes in the dispersion, greetings.
Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds.
For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness.
And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing.
Amen. Let's pray together.
Father, we thank you this morning for this time together. We ask you to guide and direct our thoughts and our actions and our words this morning. all that we're going to do in our lives.
God bless. Thank you. Thank you all for helping with the music. Would you take your Bibles, please, and open them to the book of Job, or as some have suggested, Job. I think it's probably Job, but however, don't care too much how you say it as long as you read it. That's the most important thing. So we're going to continue this. It's a long book, and it's full of big things to think about, and it's full of dialogue. And we're going to jump back into that here and continue our concept or our thoughts about the sacred space. So this will be part 2 of that. And kind of the subtitle of that was In Awe of Mysteries. So I think I wanted to start this morning, and I mentioned this last week. I want to give you the kind of a brief outline. I can't print it for you, but I kind of wanted to give you a brief outline of the book. Most of the commentators that I have seen have written this kind of like a play, or have outlined it kind of like a play with different acts. Andy, my timer is off back there. With a prologue and an epilogue. So the prologue is actually chapters 1 and 2. Some say 1, 2, and 3. But the prologue is where we find out about Job, and then we see his situation. Satan accuses him and before God, and then all of his troubles come, and right up to the arrival of his counselors, which is at the end of chapter 2. And then we've got dialogue. So I'll just give you what this says. You've got dialogue from chapters 3 through 27. The first dialogue is actually kind of a soliloquy. It's Job lamenting that he was ever born. Okay, cheery stuff, you know. It'd be better for me had I had never been born. So that's what chapter 3 is. And then it's broken down into a series of speeches. And I once again, folks, I encourage you. I know this is, you really get into the weeds when you read Job. This is not light reading. God help us. We have reduced most everything we do in our life to what feels good. And I challenge you to read it, even if you don't get everything out of it. Read it. Even if you lose track of who's talking, and you can. All right? Because the dialogue goes back and forth. So in this first cycle, you've got Eliphaz, and then Job, and then Bildad, and then Job, and then Zophar, and then Job. And each of these people justifies God. I'm trying to paraphrase this in a semi-accurate way. Each of these comforters justifies God by saying that Job was guilty. When if they knew what we knew, they wouldn't say that. And we talked about last week the concept of retribution, where the world is divided up. You know, we kind of, you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. And the people who do good don't get bad. The people who do bad don't get good. And we know that doesn't work. But that was their doctrinal theory. And by the way, Job bought into it also, which is why he had to argue with these people about his own righteousness. Now, as I started to say, they didn't have this prologue. They didn't know what went on between God and Lucifer in heaven. They didn't know all that was going on that were things that were way past their control, certainly, and maybe even their understanding. So these guys, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, they begin to justify God. God's always good, so you must have done something wrong. And then Job answers each one of them. And as you read through this, you're going to find out that they have, they poke fun at one another. I mean, I hope it was fun. I mean, they said things like, something like, it's a good thing you were born, otherwise the world would be lacking all your wisdom. Stuff like that. So, and as you read through this, you're gonna find it. Where would we be without all of your smarts? Stuff I paraphrased it, but that's the kind of stuff that's going on here. So then there's a second cycle, and it's basically the same thing. Eliphaz, and then Job, and Bildad, and then Job, and then Zophar, and then Job. And then the third cycle is shorter because Zophar drops out. Either he gets tired, or he gets frustrated, he throws up his hands and leaves, or he can't think of anything to say, or he went to the bathroom. We don't know what happened. All right, but he's not in there. So you got Eliphaz and Job and Bildad and Job. And then in chapters 27 and 28, you got Job just asserting his integrity, and he talks about wisdom. I can't go too deep into this. And then in 29 through 31, he continues on with the person who wrote this used the word oration, continues on with his talking. And then another guy shows up, a fellow by the name of Elihu. And Elihu is apparently a youngster, and we're not to these chapters yet, and you're reading, but we will get there. Apparently a younger person. And he gets introduced, and then from chapters 32 through 37, he makes 4 speeches. We're not used to speeches, folks. How many have ever read the Lincoln-Douglas debates? Okay, we have one person. Well, I encourage you to read them. And if you think this is difficult, you should read those because they spoke, their opening remarks would be like an hour and 40 minutes. So one of them would speak for an hour and a half, and then the other one would speak for an hour and a half. And then the first one would have his rebuttal for another hour and a half. So when people went to these events, they took lunch with them. Okay? And there was no air conditioning. I can't get into all that. So there wasn't even a Starbucks. I mean, they had to rough it. Anyway, 4 speeches. I got sidetracked, I'm sorry. 4 speeches. And basically, he's trying to make peace with everybody, but he can't. And he can't because his theological worldview is much like all the other people he's talking to. God's good, he only does good, and if bad things happen, it's because you've done something wrong. And then in chapters 38 through 42, you see God show up on the scene, and he begins to talk to Job. And he asks Job a series of questions, and Job reacts to those questions. We're not going to get into all the back and forth that goes on there. And then in chapter 42, in 10 verses, God levels the playing field. God answers. He just flattens it all out and says, all right, this is the way it's going to be. Here's how it is. Does it all. The culmination of this whole thing is 10 verses. They go through 42 chapters. And in 10 verses, God says, here's the way it is. So you might ask yourself, as I have said, why didn't we just do that in like the 3rd chapter? Why aren't there cliff notes? Get each of them, get Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar to each have a representative statement, and then we'll have God fix it at the end. That didn't happen because God wanted us to read through this. There's a reason to read through this. And I challenge you to let God speak to you this time. All right, so that's the outline. Now, our themes from last week. And I want to talk about this again today because we can't actually delve into all the details of the book. We'll look at some of it. But the main points are deeper than than superficiality. So, number one theme was a loss of place, inner place, because of sin. And that we all strive for control, and that when we don't have that, we lose
sense of self. And that's where Job was coming from. Job knew in his heart he hadn't done wrong. Think with me. He knew in his heart, but his theology was that if you didn't do wrong, you got good things. And all of his life, it had been okay. He moved through it. I'm sure there had been ups and downs, but he moved through and he progressed, and family and possessions and everything had gone forward much as you would expect it to. And now all of a sudden it's gone. So Job has these questions, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. Job has these questions for God about how all of this can happen to him when he's doing, he's supposed to have done the right thing. That's his theological worldview. His comforters come and they do their best to sit with him, but then Job talks and complains to them. Folks, when people are hurting, they complain. They may do it in different ways. They may moan if it hurts bad enough. They may moan. They may say things that don't really make a lot of sense because they're hurting. And they sat quietly with Job for a while, and then Job spoke, and he poured out his lament, and he poured out his complaint, and in his complaint, they ascertained that he was blaming God for his problems, and they had to defend God, because of course, God's a weakling who needs defending, right? And that's when the whole thing kind of swirls out of control. So this loss of place, this inner place because of sin, and how we strive for control. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. The second thing that we talked about was Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I want to put the slide back up here again because I want to talk to you about this some more. Andy, did you get my slide? All right, so he's popping it up. I want to talk to you a little bit more about it and go into it. And I thought about printing these out, and I thought, well, I don't know if I can. I don't even know if I can show you this, but see what we can do with it. It's my contention that all of modern psychology is upside down. And this may be true to some degree for a non-believer, but it is most certainly not true for someone whose life is intertwined with God through Jesus Christ. And we talked a little bit about this last week, and I want to expand upon it a little bit more now. Much of modern ministry, modern Christian ministry, is built upon this. And of course, this says that you can't move from the bottom need to the next need until the bottom needs are met. And the bottom needs are physiological needs, so you need food, water, warmth, etc. And then you move from there to safety needs, security and safety. And then you move from there to belongingness, is how they have it worded here, and love needs, intimate relationships, friends. And you'll see off to the side there, it's got basic needs, psychological needs, and self-fulfilling needs. Off there to the right. So then it goes belongingness, and then esteem, and it says prestige and feeling of accomplishment. And then finally, the highest level is self-fulfillment or self-actualization is actually, I think, the term that was actually first used. And that's talks about achieving one's full potential, including creative activities. So that's where art and science, that's where all of this stuff goes that you can devote your mind to. And I think there's some reality to that. Well, let me just give you a common phrase that we all use, and we kind of maybe even think is true, although it kind of flies in the face of this. What is the mother of invention? Necessity. All right? Not actualization. We come up with stuff because we need stuff. Now, I will suggest to you that this is upside down. And that the thing that every human being needs, more than anything else, is knowing who they are in God through Jesus Christ. That's the thing that was lost in the garden when they had all of these other things. That's the thing that was lost. And that threw them into disorientation and bad thinking and fear. And you say fear, yeah, what it says? We were afraid. We were afraid. And so that was lost. And that when you have that, and I suggest to you that when you have that, all the rest of these things are secondary. That when that thing should be the basis of everything, and that when you have that, the rest of this stuff can be sacrificed. Oh yeah, it's great if other people, recognize us and we have that connection. I'll go down into the psychological needs area where we've got friends who support us. That's what this is supposed to be here. Folks, we're gathering together. It's not just supposed to be for a Sunday morning. It's supposed to be all throughout the week. We're supposed to be supporting and encouraging one another. Yeah, that's fine. But I got to tell you something. We used to sing the song, take the whole world and give me Jesus. If none go with me, still what? I will follow. That flies in the face of this. So yeah, it's great if we get the sense of accomplishment for walking with the Lord, and we've got friends, but if we don't have it, where to go? Well, most certainly, everybody in here knows of people who have sacrificed safety needs. And I could pick this thing apart from a gazillion places, and I don't have time to do it all today, and I'm not a psychologist, nor do I play one on TV, and I don't want to be one. But I suggest to you that if you look at those bottom two needs, that soldiers risk their lives for family and friends every day, and they give up those things. And I've read enough of history, and maybe some of you have too. Chesterton said, we're fighting not because we hate those who are in front of us, but because we love those who are behind us. And over and over again, when they've done interviews with soldiers of why they did what they did, it says, I was there because of the people who were around me. They would have failed the people who were around me. Right? So you've got heroism and the highest attributes, no greater love than amen than this, that he would give his life for his friends. You've got heroism and the highest attributes of humanity expressed because of this. This thing is all messed up. We get a belongingness and love. Now, again, think with me, if you're going from this, looking at this from the bottom, it says we get belongingness and love needs. And then the next one is a sense of accomplishment, and prestige, and feeling of accomplishment, esteem. Folks, that's why we give kids participation awards. That's why we've removed the first and second in some of our, when you went to school, you used to be the valedictorian and the salutatorian. And in some schools, they've taken that away because that's not fair to all the other kids who aren't as smart, like me. I wasn't as smart. Those people were. I also wasn't a nerd. But that's another story. That's my problem. That's another story. I get it. Not all of them were nerds. Some of them were just really smart. So we give these awards away. Where does the sense of esteem come from? It comes from accomplishment. All right? And we get that accomplishment from knowing that we are where we are, doing what we're supposed to do, and so that's backwards. All right? We don't know where we are and reach our complete fulfillment because we have a sense of esteem. We have a sense of esteem because we're doing what we're supposed to do. So we're looking at this whole thing upside down. All right. Now, there may be questions about this, and I know that I'm certainly probably not doing it as much justice as I would like to. And maybe sometime in the future when I'm more self-actualized, I'll be more creative. First, I got to go home and have a big meal. I'm sorry, I can't help it. The more I think about it, the more obvious this thing is on the story. Now, why does that have to do with Job? Job lived according to this. And our Bible is full of stories of people who gave up everything because they wanted to follow Jesus Christ. They gave up all of the things below the tip of that pyramid because the thing that was most important in their life was following Jesus Christ. They didn't need food to follow him. They didn't need shelter to follow him. They didn't need physical safety to follow him. They didn't need the support of friends to follow him. They didn't need to feel good about themselves to follow him. They just followed him because they had no self other than what they found in him. All right. Let's talk about Job chapter 3. It's okay to protest. Now, I'm not talking about, I'm not talking about carrying a sign. We've had plenty of that going on, haven't we? That's okay too. But what I'm talking about here is our protestation with God. I was telling the story a couple of weeks ago, I think to Morgan. Morgan's not here today. I can't remember who I was talking to about it. About the child that got punished and didn't know why. And what had happened, and I don't know if any of the people are here, forgive me, they are, but what had happened was well, I know that the people who did this are not here now, I remember who they were, but there was some kids, for some reason, that got sat together right up over here, kind of where, in front of where Kyle and Sarah are, and they were buzzing around and doing stuff and creating a distraction. One of them wasn't, okay, and they made some big noises, and a mother who was seated over here, and they never did this before. I don't know why they let their little one go over there, but they did. The mother who was seated over here heard the racket and went over there, assuming it was her child, and grabbed the child up under her arm like a sack of potatoes. At that point, the child who was not making the noise began to make the most horrific noise anyone has ever heard. And it continued on back and through into the you could still hear them back into the mother's room. And everybody, I was kind of amused at the whole thing. I didn't, because I could see that child wasn't the one causing the problem, and I knew why that child protested. Are you with me? We protest when things happen to us, and we've got a healthy enough relationship to ask questions. Why is this going on? Why did you do that? So protestation does not mean we have a bad relationship. As a matter of fact, it's a good one. If we're afraid to ask, we got a problem going on. And sometimes we don't ask publicly, sometimes we ask privately, but we get along with God and we say, God, what's going on here? But it doesn't throw God off his throne if you ask him why. He may not answer you because you weren't there when he made the creature in the deep. And you weren't there when he spoke the stars into existence. And I'm getting ahead of myself again, aren't I? But he may not answer you. He may not answer you in a way that you can understand, but it's okay for you to talk to him. But that's what the Psalms are full of. David saying, Lord, what went on here? Lord, my familiar friend who was with me, he betrayed me. Well, God, you're the only one that I can trust. You get to Psalm 22, where the writer of the psalm basically is a prophetic psalm about Jesus dying on the cross. Jesus quoted it when he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's not lack of faith. That's how faith matures or grows. And if it wasn't for that, it's stress. It's the stress. It's pushing against the circumstances. It's pushing against our understanding, so that we can see and we can understand and not be faithful and not be faithless. We want to be faithful, but at times we want some answers from God. And that's what happens with Job in this book. He goes through all those difficulties in the end, and again, I can't get too far ahead, but in the end he sees who God really is and he repents. He's not lost his faith. We'll talk about that here. Well, let's talk about it right now. Let's go to chapter 13. Let's just go right to chapter 13 and I'll read it to you. Chapter 13, verse 15 says, though he slay me, I will hope in him. Yet I will argue my ways to his face. I grew up in a movement that said you never said anything negative. And I know I've talked to you about this before. Because if you said anything negative, that was lack of faith. So if it was stormy outside, you didn't say it was stormy. Or if it was cold, you didn't say it was cold. Or if you have I don't have that, but if you had like sinus stuff, you didn't say, well, don't confess that, brother. You confess that. Your words have power. You confess that, and you're just cementing it. You gotta claim victory over that thing. Job's comforters. If you hurt, you hurt. It's okay to tell God you hurt. It's okay to tell the world you hurt when it's appropriate. Now, if you're stupid, you don't know it. So there's really nothing to confess. All right? Job says, look, he says, I know I have a relationship with God, and my hope is in him, but I want some answers. That's not a sign of a weak relationship, folks. That's a sign of a strong. And please don't misunderstand me. But through Jesus Christ, we have access to some things, and we have, because of this book that we have, and the time that's gone on, we know things that Job never knew. But I would feel blessed to be able to have God rebuke me the way he rebuked Job. And then feel the culmination of that when there's reconciliation and restoration. Not with stuff, but with God, where there was a peace. So that's Old Testament, New Testament too. Paul says, I prayed 3 times that this thing would leave me, and it didn't go. Finally, after communicating with the Lord, Paul said, his grace is sufficient for me. In my weakness, I am what? Strong. I go every year. I got miscellaneous things that I want to make sure. I don't know if I need to talk about that. So, I go every year to a seminar, a grief seminar that's put on by the local funeral home, and we couldn't go. It was canceled this spring. Everything was canceled. And so this past week, it was a webinar. It was like 7 hours sitting in front of my computer. I shouldn't tell you this, but it was Wednesday, and Tuesday night we had our AR class, and I put the rifles back in my car, and I cleaned 2 of them while I was listening to the seminar. One before lunch and one after lunch. And God help him, God bless him. It's just so hard to do that kind of stuff. And it was okay. It was interesting. I got some interesting things out of it. One of the things he said was, meaning does not mean understanding. And again, this is all in the context of grief and loss. And I thought about that, and I thought about, yeah, that fits in, right? That fits in with Job. There was meaning here, and Job didn't understand. And then it fits in with what Paul said. Also, I don't understand all this going on. I prayed 3 times and you didn't deliver me. And then what understanding he did have was that it wasn't going to happen and what he was praying wasn't going to be, but he had peace. There was meaning in it, not because he understood, but because he knew that God was in charge and he was going to depend upon God's grace. Here's an interesting thing here. I tried to write it here. I brought my notes out, but I tried to write it here on this pad. This is what the speaker said. Our mind will find an artificial sense of control. Remember I talked to you last week that as human beings in this broken world, one of our number one tasks, if not the number one task, is to control our environment around about us so we feel comfortable in it. That's why you have churches today that won't tell people they're sinners. Because they'd rather make them feel comfortable than tell them the truth. Folks, and I don't want to pull the thing out of context, but it's the truth that makes us free. We can't go into tomorrow until we know where we are today. We got to have that waypoint on the map where we are if we're going to figure out how to get where we're going. So he says our mind will find an artificial sense of control, and it would rather be guilty than concede control. It's a rough quote. I don't know how many are used to this, but I tried rewinding the guy. But it was live, I couldn't do it. You know what I mean? Where's the rewind button? Because I wanted to get that down. I didn't get the quote quite down. There wasn't a rewind. I rewind. But that was the gist of it. Our mind will find an artificial sense of control because it would rather be guilty. People will say it's my fault rather than lose a sense of control. What's the sense of control? The sense of control is that nothing's going to happen to my children. Nothing's going to happen to my spouse. Nothing's going to happen to the people that I love. And when some unexpected thing happens, like what happened with Job, sometimes people will say it's my fault. And they'll take blame, and when you go to talk to them, they say, and you know logically that doesn't make any sense, but they're not able at that point, and maybe sometimes never able to get to the place where they'll say, yeah, it doesn't make any sense, because they don't want a world that doesn't make sense, because in that they have no control. If you understood what I said, please say something.
Amen.
I knew somebody was there. Thank you for that. And of course, they blame others. And then the fellow told an interesting story. And I'm not going to be able to tell it the way he did. He lived it, and he could tell it greatly. He did it great way. But he said he had a woman, and her complaint was that her 94-year-old woman, his 94-year-old mother went to the hospital, and the hospital killed her. And so the fellow, who was not like me, he was a very mental health kind of listening, moderate tone kind of, now tell me all about that kind of person, not like me. Like I might have said, well, that's interesting, and then try to figure out what's going on with that. So he says, really? So yes, he says 94-year-old. He says yes, but she was a young 94. And he said she died. And you say the hospital killed her. She died in the hospital. Yes, she was a young 94. And so he said, well, why did was she visiting somebody? And he said, no, she had passed out at home and collapsed at home, and they took her to the hospital. And okay, and he said, so she was healthy, really? And so he began to ask her some questions to find out she had a history of cancer, heart trouble, and diabetes. But she was a young 94, and the hospital killed her. Folks, if you're 94 and you got a history of heart trouble, diabetes, and cancer, you're just lucky to be alive. Even if you're a young 94, I don't know what that means. 89, I don't know what that is. I don't know what a young 94, actually, I don't know very many 94-year-old people. I can't figure out what a young 94 person is. What was going on with that woman? She didn't want to give up her mother. And that's understandable, you don't want to give up her mother, but you're not going to get anywhere by blaming the hospital for the fact that 94-year-old people die. Chapter 11, let me scoot on from here. Try to put a caboose on this. Chapter 11, some interesting verses. It's Zophar, and he says in verse 2, should a multitude of words go unanswered, and a man full of talk be judged right? Should your babble silence men? Or when you mock, shall no one shame you? For you say, my doctrine is pure, and I am clean in God's eyes. But oh, that God would speak and open his lips to you, and that he would tell you the secrets of wisdom. For he is manifold in understanding. And I'm going to stop at that particular sentence. He says in verse 7, can you find out the deep things of God? Can you find out the limit of the Almighty? It is higher than heaven. What can you do? Deeper than Sheol or the grave. What can you know? And he goes on, I'm going to keep going on. He continues on with that sort of dialogue. Chapter 15 says something very similar. This time it's Eliphaz. And he says in verse 7, are you the first man who was born? Or were you brought forth before the hills? Have you listened in the counsel of God? And do you limit wisdom to yourself? In other words, are you the only one that has wisdom? And I want to just throw something out here to you that kind of, I hope, goes into all the rest of this. Both of these men, and there's other examples of it, but I picked these two. Both of these men zeroed in on the problem, and that's, we don't know. The problem is, we don't know. Guess who does? God does. Now, to be fair, their problem was they were pretty sure they did. Okay? And that Job didn't. But when we get to the end of the book, you're going to find out that Job says much the same thing that these guys said. Where were you? And I already quoted this. Where were you when I put the stars, spoke the stars into existence? Where were you when I made the monster who's in the deep? Have you seen this thing that I made? And where were you when all this went? So he goes to Job the same way. He says, I'm dealing with things on a level that you're not dealing with, and you don't know them, and you don't understand them. That's why I said we need to be in awe of some of the mysteries. Folks, that's why our life ought to be not about us who are struggling and hassling and dealing with things, believer or not, whose heart is hurting. Where were you? Where were you? Good question. Where were we? When the Lord ordained, when the Father ordained the Son to be a sacrifice for our sin before the foundation of the world. What part did we have in that? Nothing. Again, it's not popular in contemporary Christian culture to go down through here, to go through Scripture and look at things from this way, but if you go from Genesis to the book of Revelation, you'll find out there's so many things we don't know, and we'll actually find out that God tells us there's so many things we don't know. Jesus even said, you guys don't even know which way the wind blows. How do you expect to know the things of the Spirit of God? So the wind moves in such a way you can't figure it out. You expect to know these things. God tells us that his ways are past our ways, and they're past our finding out. That his knowledge is too wonderful for us. It's full in the poetic books and the Proverbs. David writes about it in the Psalm. And when the prophets go to talk to to the children of Israel about the difficulty they're in because they sinned. And he tells them that they've sinned and deals with them. He touches on touches on the same points. He said, look, you're like clay in the potter's hand. What right does the pot have to say to the maker? Don't make me that. Don't do that with me. And yet, and this is the point I want us to see, if I can, and forgive me for my lack of articulation with it, but we live in a culture that thinks the world is like, it's just us. It revolves around us, and a lot of our church culture feeds it and facilitates it. And I really don't know if it started in the church and went in the world. I think probably it's a worldly idea that the church picked up on in order to make itself pleasing to the people of the world. And so we've got worldly people coming in without any idea of self-sacrifice, without any idea of the top of that pyramid, where they lose themselves in Jesus Christ and they have no identity except what they would find in Him. Instead, we make this environment around about us where it's all about us, and the church has jumped onto that, and we most certainly can see that that's the case in popular culture. I hope you're following this somewhat. I hope I'm able to communicate this. And I would say this regardless of the party, with what's going on here, regardless of the political affiliation or form, it's entirely wrong to make the leader of the country responsible for the health of people. Okay? And are there things the government can do? Certainly there are. But the whole concept that says you're responsible for my health. Tell you something. Whenever you say you're responsible for this, guess what that means? I'm not. Would you stand with me? I thought about singing, but you're too nice, so I won't do that. But we will pray. Heavenly Father, there are things around about us that we don't understand. And there always will be. We thank you for the insight you've given us. And sometimes that blessed insight that you've given us causes us to be demanding to know more, and there has to be a balance in that, I'm sure. But when we come up against those things that we can't put our finger on, we can't categorize. When we come up against those things that shake us to our core and make us wonder who we are and where we are and what's going on, I pray you will remind us that our identity is in you. That anything else that adds or detracts is not of you. That it all comes from you. That you loved us enough to send your Son to die for us. That those of us who are believers have stamped upon us the imprint of the firstborn of all creation. And that you are making us in His image. And though we may not understand that process, may we sometimes lift our voice and we protest. Let us also be like Job. Just my faith will be in Him. He's in charge. I pray you'll cover us with your grace, with your wisdom, and with your peace. In Jesus' name. Stay standing if you will. We'll sing a couple choruses.
I will sing of my Redeemer and His wondrous love to me. On the cruel cross He suffered, from the curse to set me free. Sing, oh sing of my Redeemer.
go this week, rejoice in the fact that the Lord has called you. He has covered you with his blood and put you in his hand.